It started on 29th Street, in that stretch of dark Philly where lines between rap crews and street crews never really existed. They called themselves the Body Snatchers. Part music, part movement, all pressure. Around 2005-2006, the group took shape, founded by Skinny and a tight circle that included Sherm. Their block was right off Jefferson and Newkirk, a few concrete steps that became a meeting ground, a hangout, and eventually a fault line. At that same time, Baya, Skinny's older brother, was sitting down on a gun charge. Baya wasn't just anybody. He was established, respected, an old-school presence in the neighborhood. His name rang bells where Skinny's name was still rising. And Skinny? He already had a reputation of his own, loyal, willing to stand up for his people, the type to jump in, not duck out. Tension started bleeding in from the outside. A beef sparked between Cecil B. Moore and 25th and Clifford, and it wasn't random. Someone's grandmother lived on 29th Street, right where the Body Snatchers held court. That alone was enough to turn some of the older heads against a pack of young, reckless street kids posted outside their family's front door. The neighborhood cracked down the middle. Generations clashed. Respect got questioned. Right as things were heating up, Skinny got locked up. And almost on cue, Baya came home. But the timing didn't bring unity. Baya, coming from an older era, didn't rock with a lot of the younger members around Skinny. The codes were different. The energy was different. And then came the incident. It was allegedly about a stolen gun. Baya confronted Chauncey, one of Skinny's friends, and the situation turned physical. Baya assaulted him. After that, the air shifted. Chauncey allegedly threatened retaliation. Words were exchanged, lines were drawn. Not long after Chauncey was murdered, that killing was attributed to Baya. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Baya has always denied being responsible. He's fought the case for years, filing appeals, pushing back against the conviction, but none of it has worked. The sentence stood. There was talk of a personal vendetta tied to the gun that was supposedly stolen. Some say the weapon might not have been stolen at all. That part of the story is still argued, still debated, still unresolved in the streets and in memory. What actually happened that night remains unclear, but the outcome isn't. Baya was convicted of the murder and sentenced to life. That's the record. That's the reality. Everything else, motive, truth, who crossed who, lives in the gray space where street stories never fully die. Abbas Parker, known on the streets as Skinny Me, was born right off Jefferson at Hollywood, deep in North Philly, a place that wasn't just home, but something you swore loyalty to whether you meant to or not. As he grew, that soil became part of him. His block, 29th and Jefferson, better known as J Street, wasn't just dangerous by reputation. It was one of those corners where the danger was documented, measured, and lived. People throw the word rough around loosely, but this was different. Brewery Town, where Jefferson and 29th intersect, stood out even in a city hardened to violence. By 2020, violent crime there sat 312% above the national average. That wasn't myth, that was math. Skinny came of age in the early to mid-2000s, a stretch of time when opportunity was scarce and survival felt like a full-time job. The streets weren't supposed to be an option, but for some, the pull was cultural, almost spiritual. Sometimes it's bloodlines, sometimes it's neglect. In Skinny's case, neither excuse fit clean. His mother and father were present. He wasn't abandoned. Still, he drifted toward the lane he chose, pulled by the gravity of where he was from and what surrounded him. By the mid to late 2000s, Skinny started rapping, using music as an outlet and a memorial. He said that after his friend Mott died from a heart attack while rapping, picking up the mic became his way of honoring him. Around 2009, he was known musically as B. Holla. On the block, people called him Boz. He had siblings, a few brothers and a sister, and tragedy didn't spare his family. One of his brothers was killed in a motorcycle accident a few years back. Another loss folded into an already heavy story. That same period marked another turning point. Skinny's older brother, Baya, went to prison. Baya carried a reputation of his own. Hard, ruthless, respected through violence, the same kind of respect Skinny would later be associated with. They shared the same mother and father, but Baya was older, cut from an earlier cloth, already stamped in the neighborhood before Skinny fully came into his own. Then came September 23rd, 2008. A criminal complaint was filed charging Brahim Parker, aka Baya, with the first-degree murder of Chauncey Miller, also known as Roch. According to Roch's grandmother, she overheard a phone call between Baya and her grandson. She said Roch wanted her to tell Baya that he had nothing to do with a missing gun. Not long after that call, another witness claimed they saw Baya shoot Chauncey in the street. Those were the facts that made it to paper. Those were the details that locked the case in place. From there, the streets kept talking, but the system had already decided how the story would end. Watching his brother's trial play out day after day put Skinny Me in a seat most people never occupy. He wasn't reading headlines or hearing secondhand stories. He was watching the machinery up close, watching how words, testimony, and decisions could seal a man's fate. Seeing Bea convicted burned a lesson into him early. The justice system didn't always feel just, and fairness could depend on forces far bigger than truth alone. That realization wasn't theoretical, it was blood deep, it was family. While doing time in Houtsdale Prison, Bea crossed paths with A.R. Ab, and that meeting carried weight long after the gates closed behind them. A.R. Ab later painted the picture plainly. Prison yards run on invisible borders, carved up by neighborhood loyalty. North Philly here, West Philly there, South Philly off to one side, Uptown in its own lane. Everybody knows where they're supposed to stand. When Bea came out of the hole and stepped onto the yard, he didn't ask questions or scan the scene. He walked straight toward the North Philly section. No hesitation, no explanation, and without anyone saying a word, his rank was understood. That kind of presence didn't need validation. That reputation followed him beyond the walls. When A.R. Ab came home, the connection didn't fade, it transferred. He linked with Skinny Me, and it wasn't a casual association. It came with Bea's blessing, and in that world, that mattered more than introductions or resumes. It was a signal that Skinny wasn't moving alone, that there was history and backing behind him. After Skinny Me and OBH became affiliated, his name started to move differently. It wasn't just whispers anymore, it was recognition.
I'm one of them steeds right now for like a murder. You know what I'm saying? Like for a murder. When they hate you, they frame you. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, in due time, like I'm still gonna be giving a record shout. I'm still gonna be putting on for cool kids. Cause I ain't gonna start recording. Innocent. I'm just gonna run cause I'm scared to death. The police, you don't know what they do. When you're innocent, they still just to blew you out. They hate you, they frame you. When they hate you, they frame you. Remember that, man. Well, listen how Notorious Skinny Me beat the weight off. Y'all should let me come on my D's was on, man. Let me break it down like a shotgun. Yeah, no, spray the word like a shotgun. And at the count, and I'm going to this motherfucker 50 grand strong. Yeah, everybody know I have this game on. I don't do my clothes. I ain't that. Hey, no, I'm the realest nigga living. I just happen to rap, man.
When he first got in the streets, he came to me. He sold drugs for me. Y'all know who he is. This is my little brother, Skinny Me.
Notorious.
That boy about 130 pounds of horror. Guess what? This is what I like about Skinny Me music, man. It's just raw. Like reality rap. Skinny Me will go through a situation. Guess what? It's gonna be in the song. He's gonna make a song about the same day. When he said I killed the nigga and I did that, I seen him do it.
The city started to notice. His profile rose, his presence sharpened, and the streets began to say his name with a little more weight behind it. But momentum like that doesn't always last. Almost as soon as the recognition settled in, just as the name really started to ring, it was gone. The window closed fast. What looked like the beginning of something bigger ended just as quickly, cutting the rise short before it could fully unfold. After all the chaos that had already wrapped itself around Skinny Me, the fallout didn't stop. Another close associate, Quack, a guy originally coming out of 25th and Master, got caught up in a murder case of his own. That situation ended the same way too many stories in that circle ended. Conviction, life sentence, no daylight waiting at the end. Another familiar face erased from the streets, another reminder that once the system closes its fist, it doesn't loosen it. When Skinny came home, the environment around him wasn't calmer, it was heavier. Bea was still buried under a life sentence, and that reality hovered over everything. There was no sense of closure, no clean break from the past. Instead, Skinny moved forward carrying that weight, and out of that pressure, he organized what became known as Murder Gang. It was a group made up of younger members, kids who grew up watching the same violence, absorbing the same lessons, and learning early that survival meant strength and unity. One of those members was Osama, the cousin of Ready Rock. Osama didn't just drift into the group. His presence came directly through his friendship with Skinny and his connection to Bea. Relationships still mattered, and loyalty was still the currency that kept doors open. At that point, the crew was tightening ranks, not expanding randomly. During this same stretch, friction bubbled up in public view. Fat G's and Osama got locked into a feud that played out openly, with words flying and sides being watched. It never escalated past diss tracks and posturing, though, and that wasn't by accident. Fat G's held respect for Skinny Me. That respect acted like a ceiling. No direct moves against Skinny, no physical escalation toward the crew. The tension stayed loud but contained. Then AR Ab stepped back into the picture on the outside. His history with Bea went back to prison time, and that connection carried weight. Once AR Ab linked with Skinny Me and Murder Gang on the street, the circle tightened again. Skinny wasn't just present, he was active. He backed his people publicly, helped push their music, supported them through social media, and made sure their presence didn't go unnoticed. With AR Ab involved, that visibility multiplied, and the reach came faster than before. Not everybody on 29th Street was comfortable with that shift. Some felt slighted, some felt left behind. Quiet resentment started to grow, with whispers that Skinny was favoring AR Ab and OBH over his own block. Jealousy settled in where unity used to be, and that kind of tension never stays silent for long. Still, Skinny's reputation didn't crack. His personality stayed the same, and his name still carried weight. Respect followed him, even from people who weren't aligned with him, even from those who technically stood on the other side. In a landscape where alliances changed fast and loyalty rarely lasted, Skinny Me managed to hold on to something most couldn't. Consistent respect earned over time, not borrowed from fear alone. Even with the reputation Skinny carried, loyal, generous with his people, someone many described as having a good heart, there was always a shadow trailing him. Respect doesn't cancel jealousy in the streets, it sharpens it. People watched him closely. Some resented the attention he got, the alliances he built, the way his name rang out beyond his block. Still, that resentment stayed quiet. Nobody stepped to him directly. His militant demeanor combined with his ties to Murder Gang and OBH made confrontation a losing gamble from the jump. But strength on the street doesn't protect you from your own decisions. By then, the old body snatcher's bond was already dead. What once felt like brotherhood had turned brittle, cracked by ego, time, and competing loyalties. Skinny and Sherm were no longer aligned, and that fallout wasn't just personal, it was public. The disconnect lingered, unresolved, simmering instead of cooling off. The kind of tension that doesn't fade, it waits. In May of 2017, that tension crossed a line. Sherm posted a rap diss aimed at Skinny on Instagram. In that world, disrespect that lives online doesn't disappear when the screen goes dark. It gets replayed, screen recorded, screenshot, saved, and that's where the first major mistake crept in. Instead of letting the moment pass, Skinny held onto it. He didn't just see the diss, he archived it. Screenshots of Sherm's Instagram page sat on his phone. A photo of Sherm standing in front of his own house was saved. Even a Redfin page tied to Sherm's address was there. Every move that followed made it harder to argue coincidence later. What could have been brushed off as internet noise became documented fixation. On the night of September 11th, 2017, Sherm was riding a scooter on North 22nd Street when he was shot 6 times at close range. The shooting was deliberate and fatal. Sherm didn't survive. An eyewitness told police the shooter fled in a white Jeep Cherokee, providing the license plate number. Investigators traced the vehicle back to AR Ab, registered at a North Philadelphia address. Officers went there, saw the Jeep parked outside, and secured a search warrant. Inside, they recovered a cell phone. That phone became the second major mistake. Police obtained a warrant for it and determined it belonged to Skinny. Everything that had been saved, the screenshots, the images, the address was still there. Nothing deleted, nothing wiped. In a world where silence is survival, the phone spoke loudly. It mapped out motive, awareness, and timing without Skinny ever opening his mouth. Surveillance footage sealed the rest. Cameras from a nearby church and a poll camera captured the shooting. Special Agent Brian Peters, a homicide detective already familiar with Skinny Me, reviewed the footage and identified him as the shooter. At that point, the case wasn't circumstantial, it was layered. Digital evidence, eyewitness accounts, video. Skinny was arrested and charged with murder and related offenses, but even after that, the mistakes didn't stop. Following the killing, Skinny released 2 rap videos, Blood Oath and Notorious. According to investigators, the lyrics described a shooting carried out in a way that mirrored the circumstances of Sherm's death. Whether intended as bravado, art, or provocation, it landed as something else entirely. To prosecutors, it looked like self-snitching wrapped in music. Instead of distancing himself from the violence, he amplified it, publicly, permanently on record. In the streets, silence buys time. Music doesn't. The irony was brutal. Skinny had survived years of street tension, rivalries, and internal fractures, only to tighten the noose himself. The same phone that kept him connected to his world became a ledger of intent. The same music that once helped build his name became a spotlight on his downfall. The disc that sparked everything could have been ignored, but instead it was preserved, revisited, and answered in the worst way possible. In the end, it wasn't just enemies or old beefs that brought everything crashing down. It was impatience, ego, documentation, the failure to understand that every screenshot, every lyric, every post lives forever, and courts remember longer than the streets do. Skinny Me didn't fall because he lacked respect or loyalty. He fell because he left a trail where none was needed, turned moments into evidence, and let pride override discretion. In a game where survival depends on moving quietly, he moved loudly, and the consequences followed exactly where he led. Before the case ever reached a jury, the ground was already being shaped against him. In February 2020, the Commonwealth made its intentions clear. Prosecutors formally notified the court that they planned to introduce two explosive pieces of evidence: the contents of Skinny Me's cell phone and the rap videos where he performed Blood Oath and Notorious. From the jump, the state signaled it wasn't just going to argue bullets and ballistics, it was going to put his words, his movements, and his image on trial right alongside him. The defense pushed back. In March 2020, Skinny Me filed a motion trying to block Special Agent Brian Peters from identifying him in the surveillance footage. The argument was simple. Peters' identification wasn't based purely on personal observation, but on collective law enforcement knowledge, shared information, familiarity built through police networks, not a clean, independent ID. The defense tried to crack the foundation before the house went up. That didn't work. Then came another attempt. In September 2021, Skinny Me filed a motion to suppress everything pulled from his cell phone. The claim was that police lacked probable cause to get the warrant in the first place, and that the warrant itself was overbroad, too wide, too invasive, too much fishing. The phone was the spine of the case, and the defense knew it. If the phone went down, a lot of the prosecution's narrative collapsed with it, but the court let it stand. The case moved forward to a full jury trial, and once it did, there was no pulling punches. The trial court allowed the Commonwealth to play Blood Oath for the jury with full sound, lyrics, tone, delivery, everything. Portions of Notorious were also shown, though without audio, specifically so jurors could study Skinny Me's movements and mannerisms. The message was clear, even silence could speak. The government stacked its case brick by brick. Witness testimony, surveillance footage, cell phone records, police testimony, and sitting at the center of the storm, the rap videos and the lyrics. That decision became the most controversial move of the entire trial. Art was no longer just art. Prosecutors framed it as confession, timing, motive, and mindset wrapped in rhythm. When the dust settled, the jury came back with a clean sweep. Guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, possession of an instrument of crime, carrying a firearm without a license, carrying a firearm in public in Philadelphia. There was no delay, no pause. The trial court immediately sentenced Skinny Me to mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. The door didn't just close, it locked. Skinny filed a post-sentence motion. Denied. He filed a timely notice of appeal. That appeal was heard, and the court laid out the issues plainly, almost clinically, as if reading off the final chances of a man already buried under paper and precedent. The questions raised were these. First, did the trial court err in admitting the rap lyrics into evidence? Second, did the court err by refusing to suppress the evidence recovered from Skinny Me's cell phone? Third, did the court err in allowing Special Agent Peters to identify Skinny Me from police and church surveillance footage when that identification was allegedly based on collective law enforcement knowledge rather than direct personal observation? Fourth, did the prosecutor commit misconduct during closing arguments? With Skinny Me convicted and serving a life sentence, this appeal wasn't just procedure, it was the last thin rope between him and permanent confinement. On the first issue, the defense argued that rap lyrics are artistic expression and pointed to other cases where courts ruled such lyrics inadmissible. The argument leaned heavily on the idea that music is metaphor, not confession, performance, not proof. The court didn't buy it. The judges reasoned that these lyrics were recorded after the murder and contained language that would lead a reasonable person to believe the words referenced a specific real-world event. If prosecutors could draw a link between the lyrics and the crime, and they did, then those lyrics were fair game. Art didn't become immune just because it rhymed. The trial court ruled the argument lacked merit. In its written opinion, the court broke it down bluntly. Lyrics from Notorious were never actually presented to the jury, undercutting part of the defense's claim. As for Blood Oath, the court noted that Skinny Me rapped multiple lines that mirrored the circumstances of Sherman Williams' killing. The opinion highlighted one line in particular from the chorus, "Broad day I shoot ya, I take your head, Medusa." The court pointed out that the victim was shot before 6 p.m. in early September during daylight hours on a busy thoroughfare next to an active shopping center. It also noted that the victim wore dreadlocks, which prosecutors argued resembled the hair of the mythological figure Medusa. To the court, these weren't abstract bars, they were echoes. The appellate court treated the record like a crime scene, slow, methodical, no romance left in it. Every argument Skinny Me raised got stripped down, examined, and pinned back to the same hard reality, his own trail. They started where the damage was deepest, the music. The judges didn't entertain the idea that the lyrics floated in some abstract artistic vacuum. They went bar by bar, frame by frame, and laid them next to the facts of the homicide like shell casings on a table. In Blood Oath, Skinny rapped that he and Moss pick you off. And as those words landed, the video cut directly to Malik West sitting beside him. That visual mattered. Investigators had already shown that Malik West followed Skinny immediately after Sherman Williams was shot, and that the two men returned together to the North Sydenham Street residence right after the murder. The court didn't see symbolism, they saw sequencing. Then came the line where Skinny bragged that his last murder was brutal and unsolved. The judges pointed out the timing like a wound you couldn't ignore. The song dropped in early 2018 while the case was still active, while detectives were still pulling footage, still knocking doors, still chasing leads. This wasn't ancient history being mythologized. This was current, raw, and ongoing. The lyrics kept stepping deeper into the facts. Skinny rapped about a man getting shot with a hollow. The record showed that Sherman Williams was killed with .40 caliber ammunition, and when police searched the Sydenham Street residence, they recovered a .40 caliber firearm loaded with 7 hollow point cartridges. The match was exact enough to make coincidence collapse under its own weight. Then the court hit the line that sealed it, the one where Skinny said he doesn't bother aiming because he get close. Eyewitnesses told detectives the shooter stood over Sherman Williams and fired downward. Surveillance footage confirmed it, showing Skinny positioned directly above the victim as shots rang out. Close range, no distance, no ambiguity. The court spelled it out. In Blood Oath, Skinny rapped about an unsolved murder, referenced firing in broad daylight, mentioned hollow point ammunition, and described shooting up close, all immediately after a chorus tied to imagery prosecutors connected to the victim. Every major lyric aligned with a confirmed detail of the killing. That alignment, the court said, shattered the argument that the song was pure fiction. The lyrics mirrored the crime too closely, too specifically, and too repeatedly. The risk that the jury would mistake art for confession wasn't speculative. It was grounded in fact. The lyrics were properly admitted. No abuse of discretion, no relief. Strike one. Then came the phone. Skinny attacked the warrant used to search his cell phone, arguing that it violated the Fourth Amendment because it wasn't narrow enough. His claim boiled down to this: if police don't spell out exactly what they're hunting for, the search becomes unconstitutional rummaging. The court shut that down. Judges reminded everyone that search warrants aren't written with crystal balls. When police investigate a homicide, they can't predict whether the key evidence will be a photo, a message, a contact list, a screenshot, or location data. Limiting a warrant too tightly can cripple an investigation before it starts. Here, police made clear what they were looking for: evidence that could identify witnesses, suspects, and individuals connected to 3234 Sydenham Street and the Jeep Cherokee used to flee the scene. They couldn't know ahead of time what form that evidence would take or when it would have been created. Putting an artificial time limit or file type restriction on the search would have been unreasonable. The court ruled the warrant was grounded in common sense, tied directly to the murder investigation, and sufficiently particular given the circumstances. Skinny's phone search stood. Strike two. Next, Skinny tried to knock out Special Agent Brian Peters' identification testimony. The defense claimed Peters didn't really recognize Skinny on his own, arguing his identification was contaminated by the collective knowledge doctrine, that he was relying on information shared by other officers rather than personal familiarity. The court explained the doctrine clearly. When officers work together, information flows, and reasonable suspicion can be built collectively. But in this case, Peters didn't even need that safety net. Peters testified that he had 10 to 20 direct encounters with Abbas Parker over more than a decade. He spent 8 years in Central Detectives and knew Parker from repeated interactions on the street, in the neighborhood, and at the courthouse. These weren't passing glances. At least 4 of those contacts involved real conversations. Peters also knew Parker as an original member of the Body Snatchers, recognizing him by mannerisms, tattoos, and music. By the time Sherman Williams was killed, Peters had known Skinny Me for over 10 years. The court ruled that his identification was independent, credible, and properly admitted. Strike three. The final play was desperation, the claim that the prosecutor committed misconduct during closing arguments. The prosecutor told the jury it's hard to be a witness, harder in Philadelphia and harder still in a Philadelphia murder case. Skinny argued that statement improperly vouched for Commonwealth witnesses. The court didn't even flinch. To preserve a claim like that, defense counsel had to object in real time and ask for a mistrial or curative instruction. None of that happened. No objection, no pause, no procedural move at all. Because the defense stayed silent, the claim was waived. The court dismissed it outright, game over. 4 arguments, 4 failures. By the end of the opinion, the picture was brutal and unromantic. Skinny Me didn't lose because of some technical trap or crooked break. He lost because the evidence stacked too high. Screenshots on his phone, surveillance footage, witness testimony, his movements, and most of all, his own words turned into exhibits. The court made it clear this wasn't a case where rap was punished for existing. It was a case where lyrics lined up with reality so tightly that they stopped being performance and started reading like a record. His phone didn't help him. His music didn't help him. His silence at key moments didn't help him. And with the appeal denied, Skinny Me's story ended where the trial court left it. Mandatory life without parole. The booth replaced by a cell. The diss tracks preserved forever as evidence instead of legacy. Getting hit with a murder charge in Philadelphia isn't just paperwork. It's stepping straight into a machine you've heard about your whole life. Courtrooms, detectives, wiretaps, prosecutors who already think they know who you are before you ever open your mouth. From the outside looking in, that's the system Abbas Skinny Me Parker walked into. From day one, he knew it wasn't going to be a friendly arena, or even a neutral one. In his mind, the courts weren't lining up to give him the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't the type they extend grace to. Young, loud, tattooed, aggressive in demeanor, a rapper with a following, a face known in neighborhoods police already had circled on maps. To city officials and law enforcement, he represented everything they claimed to be fighting against. And that reputation didn't start with this case. Skinny's name had surfaced before in other homicide investigations. It floated through police reports, rumors, and street conversations. Nothing stuck, no convictions, no charges that held. But the name kept appearing, and when you're a figure like that in Philadelphia, your name becomes a shadow that follows you everywhere. When this murder case finally landed, that shadow walked into the courtroom with him. On the streets, that same reputation meant something different. Up and down Philly blocks, he had respect. And in that world, respect isn't handed out for kindness alone. It's earned through presence, through posture, through the willingness to stand firm when others fold. But the currency of that kind of respect is usually violence, and violence has a predictable destination, a jail cell. When you build a name in environments where survival is tied to toughness, the applause is loud, but the consequences are louder. Skinny's image, his affiliations, his persona, all of it played well in the streets. In court, it painted a different picture. Being a rapper didn't shield him. Being loved in parts of the community didn't shield him. If anything, it amplified the attention. The louder the buzz around your name, the harder the fall when the system finally locks in. And once the charge was first-degree murder, the margin for error disappeared. In Philadelphia, beating a murder case is an uphill climb under any circumstances. Under these circumstances, reputation already formed, image already defined, prosecutors armed with footage, testimony, and lyrics, the climb becomes nearly vertical. In the end, the streets that respected him couldn't sit in the jury box. The image that earned him admiration couldn't argue motions. The persona that made him feared couldn't negotiate sentencing guidelines. Violence tends to lead somewhere predictable, and by the time the trial was over, the trajectory had run its course.
This shit is wicked in these mean streets.